Well, you all, we've gotten to the point in the semester where we need to start thinking about the essays in the class. Exciting. I'm excited, and I'm not being sarcastic when I'm saying this. I really am excited because writing about literature it's really fun in a sense because it allows you to share more of your own interpretation with the text that we read. So let's talk about writing about literature a little bit more. After we finish a story, it's not fully complete until we write about it. Yes, I know if it's the dreaded story that you didn't like and you finally get to that last sentence and you breathe a sigh of relief that it's over and you don't have to ever think about it again. But, thoughts about it may still creep up, or just, why you didn't like it so much. What was it about it? We're always thinking about the work we read, and in a positive sense, after we finish a story, it's not fully complete until we get a chance to really analyze, what it is that drives us to this story, this text, what it means, and deeper hidden messages as well. So the way we interpret the text allows us to leave an impact when we write about literature. It's our lasting impact on the work. So, common assumption students might have, understandably, is they think, wait a minute, don't I already write about the literature in all my weekly assignments for the class? Well, of course you do. But those serve a little bit more as reaction pieces. They're a little more informal. If they're discussions or just writing activities, they're often just answer these questions 1 through whatever and see what your reaction is on the piece. So it's a little more informal. It's not as structured. It doesn't require as much dedication. Plus, after especially discussions, I know we're not in a face-to-face class, unfortunately, but we are getting some discussions in, and you are commenting peers at least. So I tend to have you all answer by saying something, highlighting something that you all had similar in response to, and also something very different. And it's that different part that I think is very important because, people help you help people, and people help you look at something in a different angle, a different light that you didn't notice. And you may not agree, and that's okay. But discussion and just time to think about the work more after, you may discover new ideas that you didn't get a chance to connect. This happens to me sometimes if I read a text and I form my own thoughts, but sometimes I have a discussion with a colleague, or sometimes I watch a YouTube video, or I listen to a podcast about the work, or I read some type of interpretive analysis over it, and they bring up points that I either overlooked or that I just didn't quite connect with either. So it's really fun. And another way that I do this is if I see a movie that's really complex and it takes a lot of time for me to think about after, sometimes I go on YouTube and watch a video review of it, and sometimes they catch things that I didn't catch. So it's just, a way to have more time to think about what we're reading. So this is leading us to literature essays. So there's not one universal type of literature essay. In fact, in this class, I'm calling them critical analysis essays because instructors tailor and change them based on what the course is as well. So this is where we need to think about genre conventions. If you think about a genre is formed based on its conventions. So if you think about it this way, if I tell you right now, I want you to draw or picture in your mind what a menu at a restaurant is, what do you picture? You most likely picture a paper that has food and drink items, prices, ingredients, etc. You also picture it to look a certain way, right? You don't expect a menu at a restaurant to be one really long, single-spaced paragraph that doesn't break up menu items, doesn't use color changes or section headings, and doesn't break up text. You want it to be easy to read. You want section headings. You want it to use bold font. You want it to have the menu items. You don't want to read one lengthy long paragraph when you think of a menu at a restaurant, right? So it's genre conventions. When you think of a text on a phone, when you think of a YouTube video, a website, this actual PowerPoint right now, these are all genres because they have certain conventions. They look a certain way and they are tailored to be clear to the audience as well. So a literature essay has conventions. Therefore, your audience anticipates it to discuss specific aspects of the fiction it covers. As those who walk into a restaurant and expect a menu to have specific information, your literature essay has specific information that the audience anticipates. So let's talk about that a little bit. What a literature essay does is it makes a claim, meaning an argument, about the work. And only about the work, by the way. It serves two goals. It breaks down the work, so that's called an analysis, so your audience understands it on a deeper level. And it also persuades the audience that your interpretation, and your interpretation meaning your claim, is valid. So when we think about tone, audience shapes our tone when we communicate. How do you sound when you ask somebody for a favor? Do you sound different depending on the audience? Say, when you ask your best friend for a favor, pretend you didn't go to class. We'll pretend we're in a face-to-face course and you didn't go to class and you need the lecture notes. How do you sound when you ask your best friend for a favor? Do you send them a text and say, hey, I got to ask you a huge question. Can I please, maybe emphasis on the please, please borrow your notes from today. LOL. Something informal, right? And silly. Versus what if you had to ask your boss for a favor at work? You would maybe talk to them face to face, or maybe you would send an email and your tone would change. You probably wouldn't say, hey, I gotta ask you a question, right? You wouldn't overuse the word please. You may not even use the word please. You tailor your message so that you sound more professional talking to your boss. This is considering tone. So who is your audience for a literature essay? Common assumption is my instructor, because they give me the grade, they give me the assignment guidelines. I want to please them and get the good grade. It's tempting to respond that way, right? You're in class. However, literature essays teach you how to explain something on a deeper level so that the audience understands the work better. This type of mentality is important as you progress in your academic career, but more importantly in your professional career. When you speak to others in the workplace, you want to make sure they understand what you're trying to tell them. So breaking down complex information is what you do. So the literature essay does the same thing. You want to assume your audience actually has read the fiction work that you're analyzing. So that just means you don't have to be too detailed with what happens in the story, meaning the plot action. Don't give a summary of the plot. That's just a summary paper. You're assuming the audience knows the beginning, middle, and end of the story. But you are helping them interpret it differently than they interpreted it, and maybe more complex. Kelly Mays mentions that assume the audience has read the text only once. So they are beginning to form their own ideas, but they've only read it once. So you're trying to get them to think about it on a different, deeper level. That's the analysis part. But you're also trying to persuade them to consider your interpretation as valid because it's your claim. So consider tone again. You respect the audience. You respect their ideas toward the text because everybody interprets literature differently. So you want to keep them also engaged with your interpretation, and that just means you want to keep them interested. So you don't want to write a plot summary paper because that will bore them, and it's not the conventions of a literature essay. So this is an example of misusing tone incorrectly. Obviously, the only theme in the story is that jealousy drives human desire. The word obviously isn't formal, and it also doesn't show respect to the audience. It's making it sound like your answer is obvious and it's so silly that they didn't notice it. It's very disrespectful to your audience. It also makes it sound like your theme, that your argument, your interpretation is the only interpretation out there in the world and everybody else is wrong. So you don't want to be informal in tone. Here's an example of respectful tone. Respectful, formal tone. Formal meaning professional sounding tone. Academic. A theme we can interpret from the story is that human desire is driven by jealousy. This shows the audience that your paper will focus on that theme, but you use the word a theme instead of the only theme, the universal theme, and that's it. You can say a main theme if you want, but you're still just keeping a focus on the essay, but you're showing the audience that it's open to interpretation. Maybe somebody else did not get that theme. Maybe somebody else found a different theme that's different from human desire being driven by jealousy. Maybe they found that human desire is driven by pride or respect or accomplishment, something differently, entirely different. So you're just saying that it's open to interpretation. So again, when considering tone, Kelly Mays reminds us that you want to use the present tense, so use present verbs. This just helps with consistency in general, so you can remind yourself, I got to keep it in present tense so that it doesn't jump between past, present, and future. So incorrect would be the narrator stated, that's past, that Noel was, that's past, a fashionable person. He is an important public figure, that's present. He will accomplish his goals, that's future. It's all inconsistent, right? It's jumping around too much. So when we think about correct tense, the narrator describes Juan as a fashionable person. He is an important public figure. The narrator hints, so that keeps it present to us, the audience, that he will accomplish his goal. His goals haven't been accomplished in the story, so we can't change that. That's future. But if we say the narrator hints, it keeps it present. The only time to use past tense is if you make a reference to a historical event that already happened, a past event in the author's life if it's relevant because it already happened, or if you're quoting dialogue in the story and they're talking in the past tense, well, you can't change the dialogue. That's written that way for the story, so that's okay. You can write your essays in first person, where you use pronouns I, we, or us, but don't overuse. So here's an example. The tone starts to lose formality if you overuse first person, and then the focus becomes more on you, the author, instead of the text that you are interpreting. So here's an example of overusing first person. I think Maria is trapped in a state of confusion. I can relate to this because I can lose track of my realities. You may be tempted to start writing about your own personal experiences in that case, and then the essay starts to drift into your personal life, and it takes the reader away from the text, which is not good for a literature essay. Change it to, Maria is trapped in a state of confusion. We are guests of her thoughts and can draw a personal connection through Maria's actions to a time when we once lost track of reality. We can just touch on that a little bit, losing track of reality, but then we're not as tempted to go on a tangent into our own personal life. We can jump back into what happens to this character, Maria, and how she loses track of reality. So think about that as well. Thesis statements are incredibly important in literature essays. A thesis statement guides your essay. All points lead to it. You should only have one thesis, and it's placed in the introduction paragraph. It's usually the last sentence of the introduction paragraph. That way the audience is clear on the focal point of your essay. A thesis tells your audience what your essay is going to analyze, what your claim is in the analysis. A thesis is debatable, so it should state your claim. Why? Because the audience might read that and think, I disagree, but I'll keep reading and see what you've come up with to prove this claim. Not all readers will agree, and that's okay. You always need to provide evidence from the work you are analyzing to validate this claim. Otherwise, you lose a lot of credibility in that sense, and it sounds that like almost as if you're making up the story. Compare the difference between factual statements and thesis statements on page 191 of our textbook. It's an excellent chart she has for you all to compare what a factual statement is that just talks about what happens in the story versus the deeper hidden meanings of thesis statements that provide interpretations, provide opinions more. Where when you read those thesis statements, you could disagree with them. They're opinions, which is good, and they're not factual statements of plot. Avoid thesis statements being about what the story is about, meaning plot, action. So, example of factual statement that's incorrect. The TV show Glow is about female wrestlers. That's not an opinion, right? It's a fact. You can't argue out of that. This bores the audience. It sounds like the rest of the paper will just be a summary of what the story is about plot action, which you want to avoid. So, example of a thesis statement where it's a claim, an opinion, an interpretation of the work. Glow presents character Debbie Egan as a feminist, but invites us to view her as another machine in the toxic masculinity world. That word invites, and she gives hints to this in page 191. Using those types of words, invites, motivates, discusses, interprets, reactions, things like that. Those words help us hint that this is debatable, but it's what you think, it's your claim. Somebody else who watches this show might not see her character that way. They might see her as a very strong feminine figure out to destroy the toxic masculinity world. But this is just one interpretation. So your thesis statement should be your claim, meaning your opinion that interprets the text. So if we continue with thesis statements, analyzing literature, as we've realized, is messy because everybody has their own interpretation. While you have this goal in these essays to persuade the audience that your claim is valid, remember, your claim is not the only claim out there. You don't want to persuade the audience that your claim is the only valid option. In fact, you want to make it complicated for the audience, where after they read your essay, you've just made it more complicated for them. And now they're thinking of their ideas and your ideas together, and they can't find a concrete answer to the interpretation, which is a good thing. We want to mess it up for them a little bit. You want the audience to leave the essay with more options to interpret, not less. So think about these tips when you write the essay. Don't write an evaluation essay. An evaluation essay is a review almost. It's a judgment. It's where the author makes a judgment about whether or not they recommend the story. So don't do that. You can evaluate in the conclusion if you'd like and if it's relevant. Don't write an evaluation essay on character choices in a personal opinion context. You can analyze character actions, of course, and how it plays to a larger part of the story or the theme, but you don't want to do it on a personal opinion context. And this is when the author disagrees with the character's choice based on their own personal preferences about social issues. Like I said earlier, you can analyze how a character's action modified the theme of the story, for example. That's more than okay because that's keeping the focus on the text. That way the focus is on the story, not outside otherworldly issues. Keep the focus always on the story itself and nothing else when you write critical analysis essays. As Kelly Mays states, your primary job in literature essay is to thoughtfully explore what the work communicates and how it does so. How does the work communicate to a larger theme or idea or literary element? Always, always, always use evidence from the text. Critical analysis essays are not research essays. You don't need to find outside sources to validate your claim. The only source in a critical analysis literature essay is the story itself. So always use evidence from that story to support your interpretation and claim. And we'll discuss how to incorporate that a little bit more next week. When you format the essay, the good thing about 1302 essays in general, but especially critical analysis essays, they're a little bit more open to format. I mean, there's a loose guide that we need to follow so that you have a focus, but they're very different than maybe what you wrote in 1301. They're certainly different from my own 1301 essays. So they're a little less technical, but they still have a guide that we need to follow. So in the introduction paragraph, include the title of the work. We need to know, the audience needs to know what fiction story you're writing about. You want to respect the author, so you want to include who wrote the story. You should include plot summary, what happens, beginning, middle, end, but don't overshare. It's really tempting to write a long paragraph about the story and what happens, but don't overshare. She recommends plot summary to 1 sentence. But I recommend, you don't have to keep it to 1, but don't go over 3 sentences. Try to connect the plot summary to what it is you're interpreting as well. Connect it to whatever your essay topic is going to be a little bit. Use a motive, she mentions. A motive is a way to boost your credibility, to gain respect on the audience. It also respects other viewpoints about whatever claim you are interpreting. Did your opinion, for example, if your interpretation is what the theme of the story is, if you write a little bit about what you thought the theme originally was and how it changed into this theme you're writing about, that's giving a motive a little bit to this change. Does a character show different conflicts than what it is you're going to really focus on in the essay? Are there completely different tones that some people might interpret differently, but then your paper is only going to focus on one particular tone? It's just using a motive prepares the audience for what your claim will be, but it also stops and shows respect to other viewpoints as well. And then, of course, most importantly, you end with your thesis. The thesis is your claim. What is it that you are interpreting? What is your argument? And then they're called, this is kind of a 5-paragraph essay, but we don't like to call it that when we move up in these types of classes. We don't want you all to feel that it's so technical, but use the technicality part to your advantage. So middle paragraphs, we'll call them. This is where you prove your claim. You prove the thesis. Use topic sentences that connects each paragraph to the thesis statement. She's an excellent example of topic sentences that break down the thesis statement in page 1928. Always provide evidence from the story to prove your claim. Double check assignment guidelines to find out if there's a certain number of times you need to provide evidence. And then the conclusion. How will you send the audience away back into reality, Kelly Mays states. There's 3 different ways, and you can choose whichever one you want. Implications, you can write an implication conclusion, and that just means, what does your claim say about real-world issues? So if you want to connect it to a larger, out-of-context, taking fiction into nonfiction, real-world issues, you can talk about that a little bit. Evaluations. Do you want to talk about if the work is effective, if you like the character, if you like the story, if you didn't like the story, what the story does a good job with, what it doesn't do a good job with? That's all an evaluation that you can save for the end. Or I kind of like this one, ambiguity. Is there something about your thesis argument that the work couldn't answer? Do we not know if a character changed by the end, and so the work couldn't fully answer this? Is there a new question your claim raises about the work? Did you come to some new question realization that you would want to analyze in the future if you could? You can ask questions here, questions of ambiguity. So choose one of those for your conclusion. What you don't want to do is don't summarize your main points in the conclusion. That makes it a little bit more of a formulaic 5-paragraph essay that you want to avoid. So definitely don't summarize what you talked about in the essay. Think about that. And then we hop over to here. Let's talk a little bit about our essay. So, your first essay for the semester, congratulations, you got to this point. It's exciting. Critical Analysis Essay 1, it's 100 points. So consider what we've read so far or what we're about to get to. All right, here's our list. The last two we're covering next week, so if you want to wait or you want to just kind of peek into what those are about, if they interest you, you can choose those. But this is the list that we've got so far. Think about literary elements that we've talked about. Plot, setting, character, narration, point of view, theme, and symbolism. You want to use the literary elements to discuss your interpretation. This also makes your essay an analysis. It helps make your essay an analysis because this is a critical analysis essay. So you want to break down the components of the text for your audience, and using the literary elements helps you all do that. It helps a lot with that. So let's talk about the essay, what you need to do. For the critical analysis essay 1, you will choose only one of the stories we've read so far. It has to be one of the stories. Don't choose something else, but it's got to be one of these, whichever one you want. It's tempting to choose one we liked or didn't like maybe, but choose one that's loaded in one of these literary elements because it helps you form an interpretation out of it. So think about these literary elements, connect them to one of the stories, and that's the best choice for this essay. After you choose a story, you will write the essay on an interpretation of the text. An interpretation, like we learned, is a claim, meaning an argument you make about the story. Interpretations can be any type of claim about the story. So that's kind of the scary part with this essay. It's open. You all have free range with this topic. But if you're like me, I'm a very technical person. I need a little bit more of a guide. So if you want, you can choose one of these topics. You can choose one of these topics here that I've highlighted. Instead, you can choose them as your essay topic, or it can just be as a guide to get you started. Up to you. It could be your entire essay topic, or it can serve as a guide. If you're more of a creative person, or I don't want to say creative, if you're more of a daring person and you have a different idea, you can choose that as well. It's up to you. So think about these topics either to help you brainstorm or just to choose. Why sequencing demonstrates importance? Because that's an opinion. Somebody may disagree with sequencing being important in the story. How setting sparks a specific feeling or tone. Somebody might have a different reaction to the tone than what you interpret. What the main theme is. Somebody else may get a different theme. Why a minor theme in the story is more important. You could argue that a minor theme hidden is more important than the main theme. How a minor character, I love minor character analysis essays. I think they're fun. How a minor character validates the story in general, maybe the plot or a major character actions. How an object, so we're thinking about symbolism here, how an object in the story represents a bigger purpose. Because somebody could disagree and think it means something else. Somebody could disagree and think a minor character isn't important. How a character's inner represents strength or weakness, or represents them as the hero, as the antagonist. There's different ways you can interpret that. Or you can choose different options there. And again, somebody could disagree. Why a character loved by all other characters should still be considered the antagonist. Maybe other readers think that they're the protagonist. Whatever you choose, if it's one of these or if it's something entirely different, it's an opinion. These are all opinions. Because it's your interpretation. So when you choose a topic, make sure it's an opinion and not a statement of fact. You must provide evidence from the story to validate your interpretation. Make sure you include at least 5 direct quotations from the story to validate your topic. You will first complete a topic proposal this week. So we're going to think about, so don't be overwhelmed with the essay, with your topic. That's why we're doing a topic proposal. It's all part of the writing process. So I can read your ideas for the essay and make sure you have a clear topic before you start fully writing the essay. You need to get the topic approved by me first. And I like to do that in all my classes, but especially in 1302, because critical analysis essays are very free range, and interpretation is any type of opinion and claim about the text you're going to analyze. So topic proposals help us gather our ideas first before you get started. Consider the PowerPoint we just reviewed, and I'm not going to go over this again, but this is what we just talked about in the PowerPoint, they have a loose structure, but you're still having an introduction paragraph with a motive, with a little bit of a brief plot summary, motive, and then absolutely you need to end with that thesis statement. That is so vital and important. Middle body paragraphs is where you prove that thesis, and that's where you need to use at least 5 direct quotes from the story. Next week we'll go into the format a little bit with that. And then the conclusion, how are you sending the audience away? You're choosing either implications, evaluations, or ambiguity. Don't summarize your main points in the conclusion. So think about that PowerPoint that we talked about right now, and let me know if you have questions about that. Required format, make sure your essay is typed, double spaced, 12-point font, Times New Roman or something similar and readable. 1-inch margins is the standard format on Word documents and Google Docs. A lot of instructors, we toss back and forth with this. Usually we do MLA format when we analyze literature, but English courses in general are becoming a little bit more APA oriented because everybody has different majors in these classes, and there's more of a chance that you're going to come across APA format in your future academic courses. So, and just so it's consistent with the end of the semester when you do a research essay, it'll be APA format. So we're going to do APA format here, and we'll introduce that next week. You want a reference page. This is not a research essay, so keep that in mind. This is not a research essay. This is not a research paper. The only source you are using in this story is the story you choose. So whichever story you choose from this list, the only one you choose, that's your source. So don't go out and find sources. You're writing it. That's why it's an analysis. It's a critical analysis essay. An analysis interprets the work itself and breaks down complex information for the audience and use those literary elements as a guide to analyze. So you want a reference page of your one source, which is the story. Write it in present tense so that you have consistency. Always avoid writing in second person. That's using the word you. You don't want to direct the audience in that way, and you're not writing instructions, right? You're writing an analysis. You can write this in first person if you'd like, but think about the PowerPoint and don't overuse or don't go on a tangent into your own personal opinions about larger issues. If you feel weird writing in first, third person is always the more formal route. So third person point of view is more than okay. Just be cautious if first person is used. 3 to 5 pages total. That's not including your title page. That'll be in APA format. And the reference page, like I said, next week we'll talk about APA in a little more detail. But 3 to 5 written pages. And then, like I said, this is not a research paper. It's an analysis paper. So your only source is the story. Final draft is due then, February 28th. And this is the grading rubric. I won't go over this. Take your time reading it. Let me know if you have any questions about it. It should be 100 points. That's 40, 70, 80, 90, 100. Yeah. This just basically takes what you're writing here, what you're doing here into the grading rubric. So if you have questions about the grading and point scale, just let me know. But let me know if y'all have any questions. And like I said, this week we're just planning out ideas first before we really get started and approved with the topics.